Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. You know, this week, once again, not far behind any headline is China and what America and Donald Trump in particular, what policies should we have towards China? Yes, a lot of that has to do with trade, but for me, a bigger picture issue is the world ahead. We should, yes, trade with them, but we shouldn't do it on their terms, to say the very least. So today we have a special guest, longtime friend of mine, Simone Gao, and she's going to help us sort of sift our way through some of these things. You can see there she is. She's an independent journalist and uh, a commentator, and her website is zoomingin.tv. Simone, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Tom. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great to see you. So why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit? What do you do on zoomingin.tv, and so our listeners can know what to expect?
Yeah, I'm an independent journalist. I do journalist work. I do documentary movies, but I do a lot of writing. I comment on current affairs. My focus is U.S.-China relations. I've been covering China for over 2 decades. I was born and raised in China.
Wow. So where in China were you born and raised?
I was born in a city called Taiyuan in Shanxi province, which is west of Beijing. It's a heavy coal mine, very heavily polluted province.
Wow. So we always hear about China that they're opening up new coal plants all the time. So I take it that was an area which you grew up in, and the pollution really is that significant.
Yeah, it is. Like I remembered when I was a kid, I used to, bike to school, and my classmates said, "Hey, you have a beautiful makeup today, eye makeup today." I said, "No, I didn't have makeup. It was just you know, the the coal powder get in my eye and make me look like I have eye makeup."
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
All right, and so how old were you when you left?
24.
All right, so let's talk about China. You heard my lead in, my view that trade's one thing, but China has a plan, and that plan isn't necessarily, it is in direct contradiction to freedom in many ways, of course, and the United States. And I think that foreign policy issue is bigger than simply trade. What do you think?
Yes, I think the overall direction of China is definitely not moving towards more freedom. It's more control and more like a CCP authoritarian rule. And I think because of Trump's tariffs war, I think China's economy is really having a hard time. Although the U.S. economy and China's economy are both taking a hit, but because of China's political environment, especially under Xi Jinping, I think China's situation is much worse. The bottom
Yeah,
line.
if we can bring up a picture here talking about that, because Trump, of course, has said that we can handle this better than China can handle it. You have this Peter Ong, PhD, saying that their factories are being wiped out, that containers are down by half, they're laying off figured all these people, and it's way bigger than COVID-19. Which follow up with your earlier comments,
Yeah,
please.
I think the biggest thing that hits China is obviously the tariffs, the money thing is big, but I think even bigger than that is unemployment. So I think China's unemployment rate is probably 40% now. It's worse than during the recession time, during America's recession in 1920s. So I think the fundamental systematic problem China has is, the Communist Party controls a massive chunk of China's economy through the state-owned companies, land banks, and public infrastructure. Um, in 2023, the assets of non-financial and financial assets, the state-owned assets, add up to 87 trillion yuan, and that's more than 6 times of China's annual GDP. So the most big players in oil, electricity, telecom, transportation, banking are all state-run. On the Fortune 500 list, over 70% of China's companies are state-owned, and even more are under government direct or indirect control. So beyond the corporations, the government owns like all urban lands and has the world's largest foreign reserves, over $3 trillion. And local governments also makes a lot of money by leasing their lands. So, to sum up, the Chinese Communist Party, the state just owns hundreds of trillions of yuans of assets. So that makes the resources allocated to its people, to private sector, very small. And that's why the Communist Party, China's economy cannot grow. It has a big problem of internal demand because people just don't have the money. And why does the Chinese Communist Party not giving money to its people, to the private sector, more resources to them? It's because they need that control. This is their political system. And under Xi Jinping, this trend is going stronger and stronger. So the Chinese Communist Party is controlling more resources and making the private sector and its people poorer.
So we hear on TV that the Chinese economy, as you pointed out, centrally planned, is geared toward exports, not towards domestic consumers. And so it sounds, if you're telling me there's unemployment, and I believe you, in such staggering numbers, there simply isn't money in the pockets of people to be buying lots of iPhones and the like. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. You brought up a terrific point. Because China's internal demand is very weak, so it has to depend on export for its economic stability and growth. And although the Chinese Communist Party has said, we're shrinking our export, we're shrinking our demand on, reliance on trade, and we're going to focus more on domestic demand. But that's just not happening. If you look at the numbers, if you look at how their political system is organized, that is just not happening. So China is still heavily dependent on export. That's why the trade war and the tariffs on China is really hitting them hard.
Okay, so let's talk about the trade. First of all, before we get to that, so what happens when you're unemployed? In the United States, they get unemployment benefits. What happens in China to all these people unemployed? Do they get state benefits?
No, as far as I know, no. What China's biggest employment market is, how do you say, delivery, goods delivery. If you order some dishes from, if you order your lunch from a restaurant, people deliver it to you. If you order something online, it's delivered to you. So China's real economy has been replaced a lot by this online platform. People selling stuff online instead of going to the store to buy stuff. And then you need a lot of like a delivery people to deliver everything. So when people get unemployed, they couldn't find a job for like undergraduate college students. When they graduate, they couldn't find a job. The first thing they turn into is a delivery job. So I just talked to my family today, and he told me that in the elevator, if there are 5 people in the elevator, you can bet 2 of them are delivery people.
Well, okay, so the trade war. We have a recent headline here about China and the possibility of talking. China opened negotiations. This is a New York Post headline with Trump on tariffs with a clear warning. So China says, talks a lot of a bluster, saying that they can handle this trade war and that, they tit for tat, they raised the tariffs when the United States raised the tariffs. But can China win a trade war against the United States?
I think if you look at the hard numbers, China will definitely get a harder hit by the trade war. But China has one advantage, that's its authoritarian reign. So Chinese people can have, because they're a government, they can have a very hard life, and but the communist rule can still be stable. So the Communist Party, the Beijing government, can make the Chinese people go through very, very harsh times, but they still have a stable ruling by the Communist Party. I think that's American society cannot compare. So that's one
So,
thing.
uh,
Mhm.
so how far would Xi Jinping go then if clearly they have this 40% unemployment? They don't have domestic demand. The United States is their biggest market. It seems that Trump has this leverage. But besides being able to wait out or be brutal to its own people, what leverage does China have when negotiating with the United States in this trade war?
I think the Chinese government is trying very hard to get alliances. Xi Jinping is going to Vietnam and going to, southeastern countries to try to get countries to align with China to develop into a trade market to replace America. But that's just very, very hard because the bottom line is if a country has to choose between China and America and a country, I think that country will choose America. But China, I think, uh, as I said, they have such a big problem with unemployment. So I would not doubt that the Chinese government will still try to use other countries to do, re-export. I export to Vietnam and Vietnam export to the US. Even if China is losing a lot of money, not making money, but taking this route because Vietnam is getting hit by tariffs too, right? Even if China loses money, it will do this because it needs its people to be working. Because otherwise, I think the Chinese regime is really gonna be in big trouble. And another thing I think the world needs to worry about Beijing is if it's pushed too hard, um, it might move sooner on Taiwan.
So let's talk about that. They have said 2027, right? Is the year. Um, what is uh, the mindset to declare a particular year as opposed to doing something by surprise or otherwise? What is their goal of just outright saying, okay, 2020 is our target year, 2027?
I don't think China will ever say by 2027 we'll need to be united with Taiwan. They will never say stuff like that. This is all speculation. We need to be ready by 2027. Our military needs to be ready, but that doesn't mean by 2027 we'll invade Taiwan. I think in terms of a military preparation, I think they are more or less done. They have been preparing this for decades, especially under Xi Jinping. But the thing for Xi Jinping, I think Xi Jinping is in great dilemma right now, um, because before the trade war, before the tariff hits, all Xi Jinping was waiting is a optimum political timing for him to act on Taiwan, to maybe make an excuse to, make Taiwan look like the bad guy. We have to move on this because they're trying to declare independence or something like that. He was waiting for optimum time for him to move on Taiwan. But now the tariffs war started. Xi Jinping is in a great dilemma because if he moves on Taiwan, that means, if he doesn't move on Taiwan, if China's economy tanks, he needs something to persuade the Chinese people that this regime, this communist rule is still legitimate. So he needs something. But if he moves on Taiwan, that means China's economy is done. Even before Taiwan, China's economy is half done. If he moves on Taiwan with all the, excuse me, without the sanctions, without the tariffs and stuff, China's economy is done, not just from America, but from the world. So Xi Jinping is really in a dilemma right now. If he doesn't move on China, yeah, you can tell.
Yeah. Okay. So I've always wondered. You've been here. I don't know how many years you've been in the United States now. Americans are obsessed with politics, right? It's on TV all the time. There's this tension, the right and the left. I wrote a book about it, The Divided Era, and you interviewed me on that book years ago, if you remembered. What is it like in China, in a place like where your parents live? Is the average Chinese person into politics that much as Americans? What's it like?
I think Chinese people are very, very into politics. So sometimes the news they obtained about America is more than I do. Like my family would talk to me and say, "Hey, there's a mountain fire, wildfire in your area. Are you okay? Is America really like just like there's like a chaos everywhere and stuff like that?" So they know a lot of about America, mostly negative news spread by the China propaganda media. And I think, especially during after Trump slapped tariffs on China this round, I think the Chinese government they have done, a pretty successful job of public relations, public shifting public opinions to be heavily, strongly against America. Chinese people all think, American, President Trump has done a very bad thing. This is he could not achieve the goals he wanted to achieve, but he demonstrated that he is a dictator and he would ruin America's image, and this is not good for America. The Communist Party in China has done a very good job in spreading this narrative, I would say.
Okay, so this is a good segue into our next topic. You've been here in America. You during COVID, you had you saw the Biden administration trying to shape the narrative or push on Facebook as to what could get out there. Um, how much of that goes on in China? How much of what people information they get are directly comes from the party, the Communist Party, or what are they allowed to see in what are they allowed to take in?
The Chinese people only are allowed to take in what the Chinese Communist Party to permitted them to take in. So everything on media, internet is filtered. And the media, the state media, and also every media in China, they do heavy self censorship. So everybody knows what they are supposed to say, what they're not supposed to say. So in this environment, if you praise President Trump, if you praise America, that's just not the right thing to do.
And what would happen to someone if they spoke out on the media against Xi Jinping?
Well, for the least, if you are just posting on internet, if you're individual, your account can be closed or suspended. If you're a media, I think your media might be closed down.
Okay, so they want to control thought. This Communist Party wants people to think the way they think. So, or the way they want them to think. So now let's talk into this next subject about the Catholic Church in China. Um, how how much of people's lives is public religion, not necessarily private, but how much public do you see of religion publicly in China? And what portion is it? How small is the Catholic Church in China?
How small is Catholic Church in China? I do not have that number in my head.
But I mean, if you're walking down the street or in a major city, are there Catholic churches, or is it just so very small that you barely would see it?
Oh, I would say very, very small. In China, any religion cannot be promoted on state media. So you cannot have a documentary movie about Buddhism or Christianity or Catholicism. None of that can be, made into state media. If you have your individual account, if you post something about Buddhism or Christianity, oh, that's okay. But the state media would not run anything that's promoting any religion. And all China's religion are under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. So Catholic churches in China, they're called, what's that called? Patriotic patriotic churches. You for patriotic means you are loyal to the party. So they,
So,
mhm.
so of course, Christianity is based on Jesus Christ, who said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So it was separate from the state. So in China, and this is the point I wanted to get to, is that any religion has to operate as a servant of the communist state, correct?
Yeah, yeah. It's
Okay.
mhm.
So then so the Catholic Church doesn't have freedom of expression, not even to call itself the Catholic Church. So recently, the cardinals are choosing a new pope, but a deal was made under Pope Francis where the Communist Party decides who can be a church official in China. Now, centuries ago, over 1,000 years ago, the German monarchs did the same, and that was called the investiture controversy, and it had a big effect. Could you imagine a circumstance where the Communist Party doesn't require the Catholic Church to say who can be a cardinal in China?
I don't see that happening. The Chinese Communist Party controls religions, not just Catholic churches, but every religion the same way. So the Chinese Communist Party orders the local churches to elect their own bishops. But they're doing the same thing with the Tibetan Buddhism, right? You have three options. The party selected three kids. In Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, when one leader died, they're supposed to be reincarnated into another person, and they have a tradition to find that reincarnated kid. They have a procedure to go through to find that kid, and now the Chinese Communist Party find three options for you. So among these three kids, you pick one. So basically, the Chinese Communist Party picked reincarnated kids for the succession of the religious leader for Tibetan Buddhism. So they're doing it to everyone. I don't think the Catholic Church will be an exception.
All right, so we have just a couple of minutes to go. What there the thought for many, and this has worked in history, was that if there was sufficient economic trade, that a civilization will open up and free trade will result in a freer government. That hasn't worked in Russia, of course. It hasn't worked with China so far. So what do you see ahead for China in your lifetime? I want to ask you how old you are, but in your lifetime, do you see a move away from the party? Is that a possibility?
In my lifetime, I think it's possible, but I think under Xi Jinping, there's no possibility. And Xi Jinping's rule has already failed, I think. He is trying to demonstrate China's socialism with Chinese characteristic is superior to the Western systems, and that's why China's rising, the West is declining. All that narratives comes from, but now it's not going. China is not going seeing that China is declining. Although America has a lot of problems, but China is declining more. So I think Xi Jinping has failed in his narrative, and the next leader, if they will be, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party has to go. If the Chinese Communist Party stays, I don't think China can achieve freedom. Hey, I just want to talk a little bit about the Catholic Church in China. So I know there's a group called the U.S.-China Catholic Association, and under it is something called the Catholic China Bureau. And one of the things this Catholic China Bureau does is, they train Chinese Communist cadres about the Catholic Church. So of course they don't openly do this. They would look bad if people saw the Catholic Church directly training CCP officials. Instead, the CCP picks a low-profile school and send its young party members as students, and the Catholic China Bureau sends its people to the same school as teachers, and the students chooses certain classes that the Catholic people teaches, and they are quietly getting. So this Chinese young communist officials are quietly getting trained. On the surface, it looks like these two sides are unrelated, but behind the scenes, it's coordinated. So I think, the Catholic Church in China has this long relationship of working together. I think, back 450 years, the Catholic Church has established its presence in China. And I think the Catholic Church has an idea of, just, getting the gospel, the word of God spread is more important than anything else. China's politics, China's cultures, China's emperors, it rises and falls. China's dynasties come and goes. But our goal to spread the word of God is more important. I think that's true.
Sorry, we're run out of time. I appreciate that, Simone. Thanks so much. We'll be right back on Politics in Perspective.